Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Douglas Lumsden. Douglas is the Conservative MSP for the North East of Scotland. Douglas, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And yeah, as you say, I'm one of the MSPs for North East of Scotland. I was born and bred in Aberdeen, and I worked in the oil and gas industry for 25 years, then fancied a wee change. So I became a local councillor back, oh my goodness, about 9 years ago now. And then 5 years ago, became one of the MSPs for North East Scotland. And I've seen the good times and the bad times in Aberdeen, and it certainly feels like one of the bad times just now. And hopefully things will turn around soon. But it certainly needs changes from policies from both governments to make that happen.
I agree, actually. But I'm going to ask you about how did you get started off in the energy sector?
Energy, it was actually a little bit by accident. I went to RGU back, I started in 1993, did a degree in electronic and electrical engineering. And I remember when we started, lecturer saying that everyone that's just left has had like 6 job offers. But by the time I'd left, the industry was on one of its downturns. So fell into IT back in first job out of uni, and then went into more of offshore comms, looking after comms to a fleet of vessels, and did that up until 2017, when I thought, right, I'm fed up moaning about things that are not right in Aberdeen and in Scotland. So instead of moaning, then I can try and do something about it, and that's why I stood for election. So yeah, that's why I got into it, and I find it heartbreaking just now from what I've seen. Now, I remember 20 years ago when things were so buoyant. Aberdeen was such a buzzing place to be. The housing market was going through the roof. Okay, maybe that was a bad thing up to a point. But then when you can see the difference of what it is now, you drive about Altons and the to let signs are all there. Buildings are getting knocked down, perfectly good buildings. There was a story about one that's just been, I think it's not even, I was going to say 20 years old, maybe it's been 10 years old, just been knocked down. How can we be in that sort of situation? And I find it really, really sad. But I think the saddest thing is it's self-inflicted. We need oil and gas for many decades to come. And instead of using our own domestic production and supporting our own jobs in places like Aberdeen, we're actually importing more oil and gas and supporting jobs in Norway, supporting jobs in Qatar, supporting jobs all over the world, instead of actually supporting jobs on our own doorstep. And yeah, I find it really, really sad.
I do too, actually. So what made you go into politics?
No, as I said, it was just about, I remember going down places like, Union Street and everything else and say, oh my God, this is so grim. And it goes back to the point, well, I can either, like most people do, just moan about it, or I can actually try and do something different. And I remember being involved in my son's school football team and everything else. And I had got to the stage, right, I actually want to do something more worthwhile than working in IT at that point. And that's why I thought, right, instead of moaning, because it's easy for everyone just to moan and say everything's bad. But so if you really want things to change, then you got to stick your head above the parapet and do something about it. And that's how I did.
In your first day going into the Scottish Parliament, how did you feel? Did you feel, was it exciting, intimidated? Was it different to normally going into your normal 9 to 5?
Yeah, it is. It is like going into a new job, because everyone knows going into a new job where you don't know many people and you have to find out how your door pass works, your laptop works, and everything else. So it is quite daunting. But the biggest thing that struck me, just sense of pride. There's not that many people have been members of the Scottish Parliament representing their local community. So that was the key thing for me. It was sort of, when I started, there was still bits of COVID, so there was still some social distancing, masks, and everything else. So it was a bit of a different start. But yeah, it's the feeling of pride, especially when you get sworn in a couple of days later. And it was that point. It's just you feel there's quite a lot of responsibility on you, but it's something I would always encourage somebody to try and do. And yeah, I've never ever regretted it at all, Michelle.
How do you deal with that responsibility?
If you always feel that you've done your best and you're true to yourself, I think that's a way of getting through it. And for me, the last 4 or 5 years has just been all about trying to speak up for the northeast of Scotland as much as possible. I often feel that we get left behind. We don't get our fair share compared to places in the central belt. And it's like, if I can't use my position to try and speak up and shout and scream a little bit more that Aberdeen should be treated a bit more fairly, then who is? So it's all about pride, responsibility, and trying to do your best.
I mean, everybody that's probably listening has watched the Parliament and what goes on in the Parliament, both London and the Scotland on the TV, and it looks quite intimidating to try and stand up and put your point across. How do you
Mhm.
actually do that?
Yeah, most of it is quite theatre. When sometimes you look back and you think everyone is from different parties as like complete enemies, and sometimes when we're in the debating chamber, it is like that. It's quite adversarial, and then it is strange where I've had people down here and you're talking to people from other parties, and you make friendships with them as well, and I remember making some of my first contributions in the chamber. As you say, it is quite daunting. And the most daunting bit is at the start is, if you're maybe making a speech and then people try and intervene on you. So, you could be speaking about, let's say, oil and gas. Somebody will step up and say, Douglas Lumsden, what about this or what about that? And then you've got to be quickly thinking on your feet on how you're going to respond. But that's something you get used to. Well, I got used to quite quick, and I feel that that's the best bit about being a debating chamber when there is interventions. You're giving interventions, you're taking interventions. That's why you get proper dialogue and to and fro in the chamber. A lot of the time in the Scottish Parliament, people are reluctant to take any interventions, and I think that becomes a bit stale when you just have people reading out a speech that's been probably rehearsed or typed, maybe even sometimes typed up for them. So I think it's much better when there is a bit more time so you can actually give and take and hear different points of view and try and get your message across during that debating time.
Okay. So, where do you actually see the industry going in the UK?
I think a lot of it depends on government policy. We have the UK government just now with the no-do licenses. They've obviously got energy profits levy. And, a lot of the time I go out speaking to oil and gas companies and, it's really sad because they are not planning any new investment because it's just so unstable, especially when you're dealing with global companies, when they're looking at where they're going to make their investment, why would they make it in the North Sea when there's no stability around there's no fiscal certainty, and they can go to other countries like Nigeria where they've actually got a bit more assurance of what's going to be happening over the next 10 years. So there needs to be a change, especially from the UK government, about some of their policies. Because all we're doing just now, there's also projects like Rosebank, Jackdaw, Cambo, that, it's vital that these are given a go ahead very, very soon, or there is not going to be the capacity left in Aberdeen to actually deal with these projects. They're vital to actually keep the workforce in Aberdeen. There's a lot spoken about a transition, a just transition, but there is no just transitions. Now, it all feels a bit unjust. And a lot of the times, the only transition a lot of workers feel like is, well, a transition into either a completely different sector altogether that maybe doesn't pay so much and I have to really start down at the beginning again, or I can transition into working abroad somewhere, but that might not be good for my family, or the other transition might be into retirement. So you're seeing a lot of people in their 50s thinking, what, I've had enough of this now, so I'm gonna pack up. But I think the most important thing, and I hear it all the time, is the energy profits levy. There is no profits just now. So why are we trying to tax the companies to such a point that they don't make any investments. And what we've seen over the last couple of weeks as well with what's going on in Iran is that energy security is so vital. So if we can produce as much oil and gas that we need ourselves, then surely that's a good thing, that rather than rely on imports from places like Qatar or Saudi Arabia or imported LNG from the US. And if we can produce it ourselves, it's better for our jobs, it's better for our security, and better for the environment as well. It doesn't make sense that we're transporting gas, halfway across the world when we can actually just get it from our own doorstep.
Okay, but do you think that that's going to change in the government anytime soon?
Well, we've got to keep the pressure on. They've said it won't change in the next couple of years, but my biggest fear is that we'll get to 2030, the EPL is meant to be gone, and there's going to be very little left. We need some change in direction soon, and maybe that'll only come from change of, energy secretary. Maybe Ed Miliband will hopefully get the sack, and then we'll have somebody else who's more sympathetic and understands that the oil and gas industry makes such a huge contribution to our economy that it's daft to treat it the way like it is. And there's a lot made about getting to net zero, and why would exploring more oil and gas be compatible with our net zero goals? I understand the argument, but I think it's completely wrong, because the less oil and gas we produce ourselves doesn't mean we're going to actually use less oil and gas. It just means we're going to import more oil and gas. So, it's like, why would we do it to ourselves? It's so harmful to our local economy. And up in the northeast of Scotland, we are really, really suffering much more than the rest of the country. And this is maybe where governments don't get it. They're not up in Aberdeen in the northeast to see what the rest of us can see going on. Maybe they're a bit isolated in London or down in Edinburgh, that they can't actually see the damage that's taking place.
Do you think the north east of Scotland is the worst hit over the industry changes?
Oh, definitely. If you look at what's going on in Norway, they're still drilling lots of wells. They're producing more oil and gas and they're actually supplying us with the gas. So it just doesn't make sense that we are importing gas from the same basin that we could be producing from. Anyone else would think that is absolutely absurd. And then you've got other places like Houston are doing really well right now. And we should be in that same bracket. The oil and gas, we're not price isn't down at like $20 where it's been historically when things were really bad in Aberdeen. And when things were bad in Aberdeen, it was bad in those other areas as well. What we're seeing is things are bad in Aberdeen, but it's actually booming in other oil and gas cities. So it just shows you how self-inflicted this nonsense has all been.
Well, I do agree. I do agree. I know that some people might not agree. Do you regret coming out the oil and gas industry, energy sector, to go into politics?
In a strange sort of way, I was going to say it's maybe more secure in politics, but because we've got an election coming up in 7 weeks' time, I could well be out of a job in 7 weeks' time. In the same sort of way, I still feel almost still working for the oil and gas industry. I'm still shouting and screaming how much we need to protect the oil and gas industry. I still understand how important it is to the northeast. So it's I wouldn't say I've got any regrets, because I feel that I'm still doing my bit for that industry, and maybe I'm doing it in a different way, but trying to make my voice as loud as possible to try and defend it as much as possible. But I've still got many friends in the industry, and I can see how a good few of them have moved away already, working abroad, doing the same job, but elsewhere. But many still in Aberdeen, and I think we've all heard the stories about how tough it is out there just now. And I think I went into the industry at 23 or so. Where is those opportunities for youngsters coming through now? I've got two children, 22 and 25. They've both moved away from Aberdeen. They see their future elsewhere. And I think that's really sad. It used to be that people were attracted to Aberdeen because there was well-paid jobs. The oil and gas industry was seen as really exciting place to do. I remember there's posters about comparing what we're doing in oil and gas with the same amount of engineering as it was to put a man on the moon. It is really, really groundbreaking, and it still is. But it seems that it is in different parts of the world. and in Aberdeen in Scotland is being declined at a rate that is not necessary. There's going to be a natural decline. So why should we accelerate that decline? It just doesn't make sense to me.
No, I don't. I agree as well. Is it a concern that a lot of skilled people are leaving the UK to work in other countries in the same industry?
Yeah, but you can't blame those people. They've got to go where the work is really. And that it is back to the point that when those skills are gone, a lot of the time they're not going to come back unless there's maybe a change in government policy. So we actually have some more projects given the green light in the UK. And when those skills are gone, it's the tax revenue's gone. The corporation tax from those businesses that could be actually contribute to things in this country, they've gone as well. People talk a lot about public services, how the government gets money and everything else. But they get the money in from companies, oil and gas companies a lot of the time, paying their taxes, generating the wealth that add into the local economy that we need. And it's not just those directly employed by the oil and gas sector that has an impact on the local community. It's other jobs. We always talk about hairdressers, taxi drivers, and everything else. But there's less people in the region, then there's going to be less people that are actually not involved in oil and gas that will have jobs on the back of it. And I think that's a real, real concern. So, there is a lot of skills, I think, being lost. But one of I think the saddest things is if you're a young person just now, why would you come to an industry that both governments seem to be trying to demonize? It's almost like the tobacco industry back in the 90s and the 2000s. There's so many people who badmouth it, but it actually could be a really, really good career. And it's back to, and I think we should need to be speaking about not just oil and gas, actually. We need to be talking about energy as a whole, because many of those people, many of those companies that are working in oil and gas just now will also be working in renewables in the future. And you would like to think that young people coming into that energy industry just now, they may be working on oil and gas for the first 5 to 10 years, but they will be transitioning across to renewables later on. But the amount of renewables jobs that are there just now is not enough to maintain all the jobs that are being lost in the oil and gas industry. And that's back to the point. We need to have, it should be a proper managed transition. So you shouldn't be shutting down the oil and gas industry too quick while there's not renewable jobs for people to transition into. And that's what it feels like we're doing just now. We're closing down one while there's not the level of jobs in the other.
Yeah, because I was going to mention that because even the government wanting to head towards net zero, and okay, a lot of people agree with that, and some people are indifferent. That it just feels like that to shut down one industry, there isn't really enough jobs for everybody to transition into. When will that change, or will it change?
I think it will only change if we need to be protecting the oil and gas industry until there's that level of jobs. And that's not just me saying that. There's places like the Robert Gordon's University they've come out with many reports as well saying the exact same thing, that you cannot shut down one industry while the other one's not there. I think we should be looking at places like Norway who have actually doing it right, where they've actually a lot of the profits from oil and gas that they're selling to us, they're investing that into renewables. So they are much more into electrification than we are, but they've been using the oil and gas funds to actually fund their net zero journey. We seem to be doing it completely the wrong way, where we're actually shutting down the oil and gas industry, and we're having a huge bill for going to net zero. And we've got to remember as well that in terms of the UK, we're only 0.7% of global emissions. So for me, it doesn't make sense that we are shutting down the oil and gas industry and spending billions on pieces of equipment, whether it's solar panels or anything else from China, when they're opening up a new coal-fired power station every 2 weeks to make that stuff that they're then selling to us in the name of net zero. And I think this is why a lot of people are getting turned off by it, because they're seeing plenty of jobs being lost. We're still using oil and gas, but it's now being imported and supporting jobs abroad instead of supporting our own jobs.
Okay. But then a lot of people are going to be tempted to leave the UK to go and work in these different countries to get jobs in.
Yeah, and we should be doing all we can. And this is why we need to make sure that the fiscal environment's right. We need to make sure that projects are given the go ahead, so people have actually got jobs here to work at. I imagine a lot of the people that are having to go abroad to keep on working in the oil and gas industry would actually love still to be working in Aberdeen in the northeast, but they have no alternative. So if you have no alternative, you've got skills that can be used in other parts of the world, then why wouldn't you move? And this is why I think we should be doing as much as we can to maintain those jobs in Scotland, so we're not just providing the skills for other places to prop up their economy.
Is the government going to be doing anything about this in the future then?
As I said, that the EPL and the no-no licenses from the UK government is a huge issue. We've also got very little support from the Scottish government as well. They still have their presumption against new oil and gas, and a lot of the energy is reserved. But when I talk to places like UE UK, say, well, how, does it make a difference that the Scottish government are not supporting you? And they say, absolutely. When they're looking for investment, or their companies are looking for investment, they want to know that the local government are actually supporting them. And we're not seeing that at present. And the more and more you think about it, the more frustrating it is that we're not producing our own oil and gas, and we're not supporting. I think it's a slap in the face for many oil and gas workers that we're not supporting these new projects. And we are definitely forcing them to either go into a different industry that may well pay less, or to move abroad.
I think so too, actually, especially because UK and Aberdeen used to be quite booming. It's quite heartbreaking, actually, because I'm back in Aberdeen just now. It's quite heartbreaking to see a lot of the difference to what it was before to what it was now.
Yeah. And, things like John Lewis closing and everything else, it feels really, really bad. And, it's back to the point that we should be, when you look at the price of oil just now, it should be a boom town. But because of political decisions, it's not. And, I have friends who are maybe bought houses 10, 15 years ago, and, they're looking at, huge amounts of negative equity. That's the sort of barometer that politicians from other parts of the country should be looking at and realising how bad it is. Look at all the shops that are closing in the city centre. Look what the property prices are doing. Now, I like to try and be positive about Aberdeen as much as possible, but you need to look at those things, those indicators, and think, crikey, there's something going on here. We can't let this go on anymore. We need to actually provide the help and allow Aberdeen to sort of flourish again.
I agree, actually. What do you see a new graduate coming into the energy sector? How do you see their career going? What's going to be, why should they come into the energy sector and maybe
Yeah.
study engineering? Why should they do that?
Yeah, no, because, and I like, Michelle, how you use the energy sector as opposed to oil and gas sector, because I think that is the key thing, is that you'll be joining a sector that's not, you won't be joining a renewable sector or the oil and gas sector. For me, it should just be almost as one, you're joining the energy sector. And that should encourage people. They know they're going to have a path going forward. It's not as if they're going into an industry where they might think, well, why would I go into oil and gas when maybe in 10 years there won't be a job for me. So we definitely need to be saying, well, but it's more than just oil and gas. It will then transition. You will be in the ideal position to transition onto renewables. And of course, we will all need energy for as long as we live. This is not something that can go away. Energy, we need it for everything we do. So it's trying to let new graduates coming in know that there will be a future for them. Okay, it might not be in oil and gas in years to come, but it will still be within energy. And hopefully it'll still be a well paid job that they will love being part of.
Yeah, because I have noticed actually, as I've been looking for work, some of the jobs in the different energy sectors are paying a lot less to what they were with instead of the oil and gas.
Yeah. And I think this is, I sometimes hear it down in Holyrood, where I think a lot of people think we had it too good in Aberdeen for a while. There is, in terms of salary levels and everything else, there was an acceptance that it was quite was higher in Aberdeen compared to the rest of the country because the oil and gas industry traditionally paid better. And I think that's maybe why there was almost a bit of jealousy, I think, from different parts of the country. But it's certainly not I don't think that's the case now. And this is why I think, we need help. And I think Aberdeen and the Northeast as well have actually contributed much more than their share to the Scottish and UK economies over the years. You think amount of tax revenue that's been created that will flow into Holyrood and to Westminster. So this is why I think we need. It's not. I don't want to say we're entitled, but in this time where times are tough, then I think we deserve that support coming back from both governments on the basis of what the North East has contributed to the rest of the country over the last 40, 50 years.
Do you think that we're getting that support just now?
No, not at all. We've got the Scottish Government have got they'd announced a 500 million Just Transition Fund that was meant to be spent over 10 years. I think we're almost 5 years through it, and we're about only 20% through it. And I'm not sure if that money is being directed correctly to actually provide the jobs that we need going forward. There's a lot of the money being spent on sort of little projects that maybe will help certain groups, maybe to get new solar panels and everything, but it's not actually providing the jobs that we need going forward. And I just wish there was a bit more realism, really, that why are we doing this to ourselves? We need oil and gas. And we're not gonna save the planet by shutting down our oil and gas industry. It's back to the point. It's not as if closing down the oil and gas industry means that we are going to use less oil and gas and our emissions are going to go down. Our emissions aren't going to go down. We're just going to import more oil and gas with a higher carbon footprint. And this is the most frustrating thing that being involved in politics. I can't understand why people like Ed Miliband doesn't understand what's going on. I wish he could explain to people why they're dragging their feet with licenses, why they've got the EPL that's destroying companies, and what they're going to gain from it in the long term. Tax revenue is going to be down, and more people in the oil and gas industry are going to be thrown in the scrap heap by two governments.
That's quite a scary prospect, actually.
Yeah.
It is.
It is, but this is where I get frustrated because it's self-inflicted. If you look at places like Norway, their oil and gas sector is not being treated like we are. They're actually looking after the oil and gas company. And it's not different parties saying different things. They all seem to be aligned saying, right, okay, we want to get to net zero in the future. Absolutely fine. But while we've got a need for oil and gas, we should produce it ourselves so we can actually benefit from it economically. We haven't got that mindset in the UK anymore. And that's really, really frustrating.
But why has that mindset changed, actually?
I think it goes back to when COP was in Glasgow. And then suddenly everyone at that point said, oh, we can't have Rosebank, we can't have Cambo, this is going to destroy the planet. But it's not, because everyone else is producing oil and gas. We haven't reduced our consumption. Well, we've reduced it slightly in terms of electricity generation. But we still need oil and gas to heat our homes most of the time, to drive around. And so, yeah, it's nuts. And instead of producing our own, we're importing. It's daft.
I was going to ask you, and I know the answer to this, I was going to say, do you think the UK limiting or not producing oil and gas in different energies is going to really affect the climate change?
Yeah, not one little bit. The only thing that would reduce our emissions is if we actually used less oil and gas, which we're going to do eventually. But by not producing our own, we're just importing more. And, it's back to the point that, instead of using our own gas, for example, we're importing LNG from the USA. And that's coming across so it has to be liquefied first, transported 5,000-6,000 miles to this country, then get gasified again, and then put into our gas network. Think of all that carbon footprint of all that process instead of just taking it from our own gas fields and pumping it direct into the gas system. It doesn't make sense. Now, I understand we need to reduce our consumption on oil and gas, which we're doing and we will do in future. But while we're not there, we should have common sense and just use our own oil and gas. Because other countries aren't saying at all, well, we're not going to produce any more. It doesn't matter that UK are buying it that want to buy it from us and give us cash and support our jobs. No, we're going to switch off the taps. But that's what we're doing. Yeah. I get frustrated about this.
I'm going to be brave actually and ask you something. I have spoken to some colleagues and family. What is your opinion on the fact that, okay, you want to get to net zero and it is really important to try and save the planet, but some people think it's too late and we should have maybe been doing it before?
Yeah, my point of view is we can't go back in time and we shouldn't be making ourselves poorer by getting to net zero because that just really turns everyone off, I feel. So I think I'm more a sensible person. Well, I like to think I'm a sensible person that we want to get to net zero, not like some parties who say, no, net zero is all a con. I think we want to get to net zero. I think it'd be a good thing to get to net zero, but we should do it in a way that doesn't bankrupt us, doesn't make energy so expensive for families that they've got nothing to spend on anything else. So it must be a much more sensible way because UK getting to net zero, or even Scotland getting to net zero, isn't going to make a blind bit of difference to the globe as a whole. Emissions doesn't have any borders. The only way you get to net zero is if everyone gets to net zero, globally get to net zero. So us getting to net zero before anyone else doesn't make any difference. We are, as I say, we're 0.7% of emissions. We're a rounding error. So it's just, yeah, we should get to it, but we shouldn't not sacrificing thousands of jobs in the North Sea and not making our families poorer.
Do you think the whole world will get to net zero?
I think it will eventually. It won't get to net zero by us turning off the taps and buying and fueling like Chinese economy when they're using coal-fired power stations to make all the stuff that we want. Because there's things like we've done. I think, this is where I get frustrated in the Scottish Parliament. Sometimes it's bonkers. We're spending millions on electric buses. So, our taxes are going to subsidise electric buses. Now, you might think that's a good thing. It'd be a good thing if it was actually supporting Scottish jobs, but instead, most of that grant funding is buying electric buses from China. Now, they don't care about how they're getting that lithium for the batteries. They don't care where the electricity is coming to produce all that, the buses and everything else. So us thinking we're doing a good thing, buying electric buses, but it's not a good thing if that buses are getting produced by coal and, it's just propping up somebody else's economy at our expense.
I do agree with that. I'm going to ask you one final question. Do you have any advice for the young graduates coming into the energy sector?
I think the advice is, it does sound tough at times. And it might sound like, why would I join that industry? Because there's no future in it. But it is back to the point that we will always need energy, whether that's oil and gas, whether that's from renewables. So there is always going to be a lot of engineering to be done. There's going to be a lot of subsea work to be done, and a lot of that stuff is compatible between oil and gas and renewables. So I think if you choose your discipline well, then there should be a clear path from one to another. And that I think the energy sector can still be an exciting place to work. It needs government to support it, but hopefully they will see sense and actually start supporting that industry, because it makes sense for our energy security, but also makes sense for us financially, because it produces good, well-paid jobs that are taxed and contribute to public services right across the country.
Okay, I'm going to end on a very positive note. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Douglas for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.